Grüß, willkommen in einem anderen Aufregens video. Welcome to another exciting video, in this case episode 17 of my organisational series. In this video I'll be providing a view of the German World War II brigades and division combat strengths and how they changed during the duration of the war. For this video I'll be using the point system from the Corps Commander set of rules. This point system is based largely on physical attributes of the various weapon systems such as armoured thickness, gun penetration rates, weight of fire, speed, special combat features and so on. Viewers need to also understand that 100 points of tanks will operate very different from 100 points of infantry. Thus, comparing tank battalions with infantry battalions need to be done through a subjective filter. However, comparing a tank battalion in 1942 with one in 1945 is valid, as is comparing a US tank battalion with a German Panzerkampfwagen battalion. It should also be pointed out that while figure gaming points provides a rough way of ensuring force mixes balance, they can never be perfect. If one formation is 1,000 points and the other is 1,001 point, this does not mean the latter will win any conflict. As a result, it's best to look at the values several orders of magnitude higher. Thus, dividing by 250 gives you a simpler value where you know a value of 2 is clearly inferior to a value of 3. Let's start with the best place, which is the beginning. The Germans began World War II when they invaded Poland. The French did respond and launched the Saar offensive, which didn't really achieve very much. The initial German infantry divisions were divided into waves. This shows the first and second wave divisions, which only had very minor differences between each other. The German infantry division was centred around 3 infantry regiments, each of 3 battalions, which had a typical combat strength of the period, or for the period. Supporting this was an engineer battalion, which was reasonably powerful, a reconnaissance battalion, and an unusually powerful anti-tank battalion, which also contained anti-aircraft assets. In the Polish invasion, the Germans did also use their third and fourth wave structures, which did differ a little bit more in their reconnaissance battalion. The 3rd, 4th Wave Infantry Division Reconnaissance Battalion was more powerful due to additional support weapons. Besides this difference, the infantry division was identical in terms of combat strength. The motorised infantry divisions were fundamentally infantry divisions in trucks. Apart from the trucks, it differed little from a leg division, but the trucks did allow it to deploy heavier weapons quicker than a normal leg division. The artillery and indirect support weapons are a good example where having trucks did give it some benefit. The motorised division's high combat strength was due to its motorisation. Thus, when used in a static position, they differed little from a leg division. The Germans had 2 basic armoured divisional structures at this point in time. The primary armoured division was the Panzer Division. While the Panzer Division was tank-heavy, as many armoured divisions of the time were, this division was reasonably balanced with infantry and artillery supports contained within it. The biggest issue in Poland was the Germans did not support their tanks with infantry to any large extent. It was to take a while before the Germans learnt to break up their regiments into combined armed groups. The German Panzer Division had an armoured engineer battalion, a motorcycle battalion, an armoured car battalion, and an anti-tank battalion. These formations contained significant combat strength. The artillery regiment was reasonably standard. The Panzer Grenadier battalion was rather powerful. At this time, they were not equipped with armoured half-tracks. The Panzer regiment was reasonably powerful, but as most of the tanks were either light, it had no real advantage over its opponents in terms of technical superiority or technical level. The second type of armoured divisions the Germans possessed were their light divisions, which performed reasonably well, but after the Polish campaign they were converted into panzer divisions. The light divisions were the cavalry divisions and resembled the panzer divisions reasonably closely, although the various light divisions did differ from each other as well. This is possibly the closest to a standard light division in September 1939. The light divisions consisted of divisional support, an artillery regiment, which lacked any 15cm howitzers, a motorcycle regiment, a Panzer Grenadier regiment, and a Panzer regiment. The strengths did differ in some cases from the Panzer Division. After a period of phony war, the Germans first invaded Denmark and Norway. After that, the Germans then invaded the Netherlands, Belgium, and France in May. In 1940, the bulk of the infantry divisions which saw action were similar to the 3rd, 4th Wave Infantry Division. The 1st and 6th Wave divisions were involved, as were weaker divisions which lacked artillery, but they weren't the most numerous that actually saw action. There was no changes from the 1939 3rd 4th Wave Infantry Division structure. Moving over to the motorised divisions, motorised infantry divisions performed well in Poland, so were not changed. The result of this was, as you would expect, no change from the 1939 structure. One change in the motorised infantry division area was the SS motorised infantry division. The SS formed its own motorised division for the invasion of France in 1940. It did differ slightly from the Wehrmacht version. The SS motorised infantry division contained more anti-tank weapons and a separate anti-aircraft battalion. The infantry regiments did have additional support weapons also added. On the other hand, its artillery was weaker. The Germans were the first nation to form a paratrooper division, although the Russians did have paratrooper brigades. The 1st Paratrooper Division was little more than 2 regiments under nominal divisional control. In 1940, the division did not operate as a division and actually operated at a more small level, regiments, battalions, etc. The 1st Paratrooper Division consisted of 2 simple paratrooper regiments. After the Polish campaign, there was no changes to the Panzer Division. The light divisions, which were converted into Panzer Divisions, could have a slightly different structure, however, but nothing particularly significant. The Germans did have slightly different types of Panzer Divisions based on the tanks being used. This is the closest to a standard Panzer Division. Compared with 1939, there was no changes to the Panzer Division structure, although combat strength could vary based on the tank type and mix. The next German campaign was in Africa, when they launched an offensive in Libya starting in March 1941. When the Italians were forced back in Libya, the Germans sent a light division to assist them. This was the 5th Light Division. The first 4 light divisions were converted into Panzer Divisions, which we mentioned earlier. This was a brand new 5th Light Division specifically designed to only be deployed in Africa. The Light Division was an ad hoc formation made up of whatever battalions were available to ship to Libya, which was suitable for operations in the desert. I suspect this ad hoc nature was the reason why it was called a Light Division and not a Panzer Division or a Motorised Infantry Division. The Light Division, or the 5th Light Division, did contain a small tank destroyer battalion, which at this scale rounds down to 0, so it's not shown. The Light Division also contained a self-propelled anti-aircraft battalion. The artillery was very weak, containing only a single battalion of 10.5cm howitzers. The infantry, all motorcycle mounted, were unusually powerful. The tank regiment was reasonably standard, with each battalion being stronger than the 1940 battalion only because of the heavier tanks being present. After the German first offensive, the Germans were involved in the unsuccessful British counterattacks, which occurred between May and October 1941. This was then followed up by the successful British Operation Crusader, which caused the Germans to withdraw. When Rommel launched his first offensive, the 5th Light Division was not really fully in place. It didn't have all its components. This diagram here shows the final structure of the Light Division, which was sent to Libya and available for the British counteroffensives. The formations which had not made it to Libya in time to be involved in the early offensives were now all in place. The infantry were beginning to adopt a more normal structure. In this divisional structure, the engineers were added and the tank destroyer battalion gained additional combat strength, which now rounds to 1, so is present here. The infantry lost strength as it adopted a more standard infantry structure. The Panzer battalion grew in strength as the number of Panzer IIIs grew in number. The next major new campaign was the campaign in the Balkans. The Germans launched an invasion of Yugoslavia and Greece in April 1941. However, the truly big offensive in 1941 was the invasion of Russia. In June 1941, the Germans launched Operation Barbarossa. Staying in Russia, in August 1941, after advancing in the north and centre, the Germans swung south and destroyed the Russian defenders in the south around Kiev. When the Germans invaded Russia, they did modify the support elements of the infantry division for the invasion. While some new equipment was available, the supply of newer anti-tank guns was not seen as a high priority, and few infantry divisions had any of the new anti-tank weapons. The infantry regiment's support formations were beefed up, but as this scale has no impact in terms of combat strength, so looks much the same as the 1940 structure, or combat strengths. After the French campaign, there were a number of changes implemented in the motorised divisions. The anti-tank and infantry regiments were beefed up, but the division lost its medium howitzer battalion. The anti-tank battalion was beefed up, which did have an impact on its combat strength. The 15cm artillery battalion was lost, which would have an impact if the division was in a static position, but likely less of an impact in a mobile situation. The infantry regiment was specifically beefed up, especially support formations. After France, a few changes were also implemented to the SS motorised division, but the main change was to align this division to the standard Wehrmacht structure. The SS motorised division was now identical to the standard motorised division, at this scale at least. By the time Germany invaded Crete, the airborne divisions possessed reasonable additional support formations such as artillery, anti-tank guns and anti-aircraft guns. The paratrooper regiments were all similar in strength and were filled out fully, but the biggest change was the addition of an engineer, a medium machine gun, light howitzer, anti-tank and anti-aircraft battalion. This now truly resembled a holistic division. After the French campaign, the Germans also reorganised their panzer divisions. The other significant change was the way the formations operated or were used. After the French campaign, the Germans began to break up their panzer divisions into combined arms Kampfgruppen, with two consisting of the Panzer and one Panzergrenadier battalion, and a third the Reconnaissance and one Panzergrenadier battalion. As the campaign continued, this varied more and more, with basically any formation that was available and suitable for the operation being incorporated into any one of the 2 or 3 Kampfgruppens that typically made up a Panzer division. However, going back to the standard structure, the new standard structure now consisted of only one Panzer and 2 Panzergrenadier regiments. This allowed them to increase the number of the Panzer divisions and was the main reason. It also was to negate some of the issues in France where the Panzer divisions really were tank heavy or overly tank heavy. Looking at strength points, an anti-aircraft battalion was added. The Panzergrenadier regiment support was beefed up as well as the battalions. This was achieved by adding more support formations. The tank regiments did lose some tanks as the Germans replaced the light tanks with medium tanks. This did have a minor combat strength impact to the positive. In the Eastern Front, after a period of redeployment, the Germans launched Operation Typhoon in October, which resulted in the Germans reaching the gates of Moscow. The biggest change to the infantry divisions was the supply of new, more powerful anti-tank guns, which became an urgent requirement after the Germans encountered the Russian T-34 and KV-1. The infantry divisions, after almost 4 months of constant operation, were beginning to also experience manpower issues, especially in the infantry battalions. The anti-tank battalions received the new 5cm anti-tank gun, which increased its combat strength, as you can see here. The manpower issues were beginning to affect the infantry battalions and regiments, which had a negative impact on the combat strength of those formations. After 4 months of hard fighting, the Panzer divisions had all suffered significant losses, reducing their tank strength. While not an official change, some additional adjustment to the structure occurred in the field, division by division. While the overall standard structure remained much the same, apart from the removal of the motorcycle battalion from many Panzer divisions, equipment and manpower losses were beginning to impact the divisions severely in terms of strength of some of these formations. In many cases, the motorcycle battalion was removed from the Panzer division. The Panzer battalions were losing tanks, and the combat strength of a typical Panzer battalion dropped as a result. We now come back to the African deserts, in this case Rommel's second offensive in January 1942. After Rommel's second offensive, this was then followed up by one of the largest battles to date in the desert, the Battle of Gazala in May 1942. By May 1942, the 5th Light Division had become a full Panzer Division, was renamed the 21st Panzer Division. In addition to this division, the Germans had sent the 15th Panzer Division to Africa, shown here. It was a more typical Panzer Division. This division, that's the 15 Panzer Division, was not a typical Panzer Division. There was always a lot of variation or variability of equipment and formations in the desert, as you can see by this structure, and also by the heritage of this division, based on the heritage, I should say. The 15 Panzer Division contained reasonably powerful divisional support elements, with the other battalions under divisional command following the typical Panzer Division structure, but did vary in strength from a standard Panzer Division. The artillery regiment still remained rather weak. I'm uncertain why this is the case. The infantry regiment still contained a machine gun battalion, but was otherwise similar to a standard Panzer Division's infantry regiment. After the initial successes at Gazala, Rommel was less successful at Alamein in August 1942. After the unsuccessful First Battle of Alamein, it was the turn of the British to launch their main offensive, which pushed Rommel back. On the other side of Africa, the US and British launched Operation Torch, which opened up a second front in Africa. Well, I've mainly been looking at the 5th Light and the 15th Panzer Division. The other Panzer Division in the desert was the 21st Panzer Division, shown here. The 21st Panzer Division structure was more standard than the 15th Panzer Division, so it contained a standard artillery regiment and Panzergrenadier regiment. The artillery regiment contained a standard number of artillery battalions, including a 15-center median artillery battalion. The Panzergrenadier regiment also followed a standard structure, but it did not contain a machine gun battalion. The 21st Panzer Division was more powerful than the 15th Panzer Division, mainly due to having a higher number of better tanks, as well as being structured in a standard Panzer Division structure, which allowed its infantry to be more powerful. Moving back up north to Russia again, we enter the Russian winter offensive in December 1941, which surprised the exhausted Germans. Officially, there was no changes to the infantry division, but in practice most of the divisions in Russia were experiencing severe manpower issues. Many divisions formed 2-battalion infantry regiments to ensure battalions remained at full strength. While not a formal change in 1941, this was eventually to be standard in 1942. Within the infantry divisions, the infantry were receiving more weapons, such as medium machine guns, RPGs, and other infantry support weapons, which had a positive impact on their combat strength. In addition, the regimental support formations received additional formations, increasing their strengths. Manpower issues were being mitigated by more powerful heavy infantry weapons. The 11th Panzer Division was involved in the German 1942 offensive, and while a reasonably standard Panzer Division, did have some unique organisational features. The Germans were beginning to ship improved tanks to their divisions, as well as improved anti-tank guns, in order to counter the Russian T-34s and KV-1s. In this particular Panzer Division, a powerful motorcycle battalion was included in this division. Many other Panzer Divisions did not have this. In this case, the artillery regiment lacked 1 battalion, so I assume one of the battalions was allocated elsewhere. The Panzergrenadier regiments did not have an anti-aircraft battalion in them, and regiments did differ in strength. The Panzer battalions were increased in strength due to new equipment arriving. After the Russian winter-spring offensive, the Germans launched their 1942 summer offensive in June 1942. By June 1942, most of the divisions in Russia were down to a 2-battalion regiment, particularly up north. In this case, we're shown a full-strength infantry division, of which some did exist, and were generally deployed to areas where an offensive was being organised, such as the German summer offensive. This shows the 44th Infantry Division. For this particular infantry division, there was no official changes to the infantry division structure, especially, considering in this case the 44th Infantry Division was as close to full strength as you could possibly imagine. The German motorised divisions were operating independently more and more, so its reconnaissance was beefed up and the medium howitzers returned as a result. A motorcycle battalion was added to the motorised infantry division, and the medium howitzer battalion was returned to this structure, which allowed it to be more effective in a static defensive position if it ever found itself in that position. The 9th Panzer Division was also involved in the German 1942 summer offensives, which is why I'm showing it here. While standard, its 33rd Panzer Regiment did have 3 Panzer battalions for the 1942 summer offensive, which was very unusual. While we can see here there were some changes, at this scale we're looking at the 9th Panzer Division, and we can see it's much the same as previous Panzer Divisions listed. However, in this case there are 3 Panzer battalions, which, as I indicated earlier, is quite unusual. Looking at the combat strengths, there was no real changes to the combat strengths of the battalions, as you can see here. This concludes episode 17, part 1 of my video series on organisation, in this case analysing the German Army in World War II, specifically the estimated combat strengths and battalions which made up the divisions. Viewers should now watch part 2 next. Alle guten Dinge, kommen zu einem Ende.